Mother-in-law, if it's still Mia's child, shouldn't you be the one to properly raise her? During a discussion about what to do with their only daughter Arya after my sister-in-law and her husband passed away in a car accident. However, at this time, my mother-in-law said, "You should raise the developmentally disabled baby, you're the defective one. Is that okay?" I'd be delighted. I found myself responding instantly. 20 years later. After her party, we were dining out when a phone call came. "What's this about? She was on TV, wasn't she?" "Who?" From the other side, came a shout. "Don't play dumb, it's about Arya." "Chloe, why didn't you tell us anything?" "She's received a scholarship from a car manufacturer to study in Germany, recommended by a professor from a tech university, didn't she?" Oh. I then remembered I hadn't told my family back home. Having been ignored by my mother-in-law all this time as just the slow stepdaughter raising a developmentally challenged child, I wonder what she would think now knowing about her. I couldn't help but smirk internally. My name is Chloe, I'm 45 years old. I live with my husband Daniel and our daughter Arya. Arya is 20 this year. She's been preparing for her third year of university starting this spring, and from September, she will be studying abroad in Germany, having lively days filled with preparations. It's been a life filled with various things leading up to now. Because my life before marriage was anything but fun. All because of her, the woman my father remarried about 40 years ago. Back then, my father had divorced my real mother. And was soon after married to my current stepmother, Violet. At that time, I was 5 years old. My stepmother brought her daughter from her previous marriage, Mia, who became my stepsister. Although Mia and I quickly got along, it wasn't so easy with my stepmother. She constantly compared me to Mia, cut my allowance, and refrained from buying me new clothes, clearly favoring her own children. However, my somewhat absent-minded nature meant that I didn't really mind. But this unmindfulness seemed to further provoke my stepmother, and a negative cycle developed in our household. Mia, being an astute person, quickly noticed the tension between me and my stepmother. She worried about me, often buying things just for me and looking sorry as she apologized for our mother's behavior. This got worse after my brother Theodore was born. My stepmother paid attention only to Mia and Theodore, virtually ignoring me. Well, it was probably for the best that I was just ignored. I thought it was troublesome, but not so painful that Mia felt the need to apologize. Truth be told, my grades weren't better than Mia's or Theodore's, nor did I excel in anything in particular. And health-wise, I was never really on top form. Well, that was that, and if I accepted it, it was the end of the story. While watching Mia and Theodore move on to great schools, I started working right after high school graduation. That's where I met a young man from a client company, Daniel, whom I married at the age of 23. Meanwhile, Mia also got married and gave birth to a daughter the following year. But then, our fate took a dramatic turn. When Mia's daughter, Arya, was 1.5 years old, Mia and her husband died in a car accident. Mia was only 27 at the time. After their funeral, the discussion arose about what to do with Arya, but the talks fell apart. Because my mother-in-law refused to take her in. Normally, the child would be taken in by either set of grandparents, but Mia's husband's family only had his father, who was capable of taking care of himself but not a baby. He flatly refused, saying it was cute but beyond his capability. This led to the assumption that my parents, who still had both parents, would be the logical choice, but my mother-in-law did not want to take Arya in. "Why can't you take in Arya?" I rarely confronted my mother-in-law like this. She just snorted and retorted, "That child, being Mia's, isn't turning out well." I pressed further, "What do you mean?" "I heard from Mia before. Something seemed off about the child, so she had a specialist look at her, and it turns out she has some issues." Daniel's knee jerked next to me, I remember. "And that means you can't raise her?" "It's not that I can't, I just don't want to." I was appalled. That's certainly not something one should say about their granddaughter. Like you, a child who doesn't turn out well isn't worth raising. I was unusually furious at her words at that time. because I myself was unable to have children. After wondering why we couldn't conceive, I found out I had a developmental issue with my reproductive organs, making it difficult to have children. I had always had irregular periods, so the signs were there. I blamed myself for not noticing, but had just begun to come to terms with it. However, if there was a child available, I did have a desire to try raising one myself. That's why I confronted my mother-in-law at that moment. "Mother-in-law, if it's still Mia's child, shouldn't you be the one to properly raise her?" But at that time, my mother-in-law said, "I absolutely don't want a child with developmental issues." Developmental issues. When I heard that word, something pricked at my heart. I later realized my own slowness, my frequent minor mistakes at work. I myself had some aspects of developmental challenges. "So, mother-in-law, are you saying you don't want to take her because she's not well made or has developmental issues?" Yes, that's right. Mia and Theodore were both excellent children. They were worth raising. "So, that applies to me as well." Exactly. My mother-in-law raised her eyebrows as if it were obvious. If she had shown any promise, I would have raised her just like Mia and Theodore. "But what about you? When we first met, you couldn't even respond properly and were just drooling all over." It seems that she had written me off from that point. Even then, my father, who had heard this, tried to calm her down. "Hey now, that's not something you should say." But I knew well that wasn't what he truly felt. He left me to my stepmother and basically ignored me. Because I looked too much like my mother, whom he had divorced. I had even heard rumors about this. By the time I was in middle school, I had realized I shouldn't expect anything from such a father. For me, my family, when I was at home, was only Mia and Theodore. After getting married, my husband Daniel joined them as the only ones on my side. Mia was kind to me. Influenced by her, Theodore also affectionately called me sister and clung to me. So, when this conversation came up, Theodore was the only one who angrily said, "What are you saying, Mom?" His voice must have influenced me because I then confronted my stepmother further. "So, what are you suggesting we do with Arya?" My stepmother considered for a moment and then sneered as she threw her words at me. "You raise the developmentally challenged baby since you're defective too. Is that okay?" "I'd be delighted," I had blurted out. I was pleased to have drawn such a response from her. She probably couldn't have imagined such a reaction from me. I remember her making a very odd face. And after this discussion, Theodore said, "That felt good. But are you really okay, sister?" At the time, he was just 15 years old. He is exactly 10 years younger than me. "I'm fine. I've always wanted a child, and you know, my husband is very understanding. See, I'm kind of slow, right? If there's something I don't get, he's the kind of person who will explain it all to me." "Really? And you know, having Mia and you at home made it bearable for me. So I want to do for this child what Mia did for me as much as I can." Theodore nodded greatly. "If that's what you think, sister, then okay. But it might be tough. So if there's anything I can do, just let me know." He was so supportive, and I lightly tapped him on the shoulder. Arya, Mia's daughter, indeed showed tendencies of developmental challenges from the beginning. As an infant, she disliked physical contact and was sensitive to sounds. As she grew, she would continue activities endlessly once she started them. That's when Daniel decided to take Arya in for early testing. Additionally, he suggested, "We should also get ourselves tested to understand our own tendencies." Daniel had always been personally interested in this field. "I have friends with quite a mix of traits. They were kind of outcasts in school, but they were really interesting guys." After Daniel and I got tested, I also understood what my slowness meant. In the intelligence tests, while my verbal comprehension and perceptual reasoning were average, I was a bit lacking in working memory and processing speed, the areas required to perform actions quickly and in parallel. In other words, you just need to avoid multitasking and proceed at your own pace, and you'll be fine," he said. Although he himself was quite balanced and above average overall. As expected, Arya's test scores were very inconsistent. Her verbal comprehension and perceptual reasoning were exceptionally good. However, her working memory and processing speed were barely average. With such disparities, even if the average intelligence quotient looks good, living can be difficult. That's why I decided to seriously commit to raising this child and quit my job. It was an easy transition since I had no real reason to continue working. Becoming a full-time homemaker and learning about my traits from the test results, I improved my household efficiency under a doctor's guidance and didn't hesitate to seek outside help for childcare, which inevitably required multitasking. As Aria grew, she often misunderstood questions and earned a bad reputation among school teachers, neighborhood adults, and friends. But we would address any issues as they arose. That was all Daniel and I could do as we struggled alongside Aria. Interestingly, she had known quite early on that I wasn't her biological mother, and she accepted it matter-of-factly. And she has always taken things in stride. It's a bit strange, but that seems to be her way of feeling about it. She smoothly went through middle and high school, and then straight into the tech university she aimed for within commuting distance. Then last year, even though she was only a sophomore, she suddenly announced that a professor from her department had suggested she study abroad at a university in Germany. This is the first I'm hearing about it. Is that really true? Yeah, is that okay? Aria asked in the same tone as when she would ask if she could go on a trip or head into town for shopping. Oh right, apparently, they're arranging a scholarship that doesn't need to be repaid for the expenses. Really? I was surprised. More than the fact that we'd save on tuition, it was about what Aria had that merited such support. Honestly, I didn't fully understand what Aria was studying at school. I was never too bright myself, and I had no particular interest in academia. Especially Aria's major in engineering, or rather, anything science-related was beyond me since middle school textbooks. Daniel, more of a liberal arts person, wasn't as clueless as I was, but now all he could do was marvel at Aria's studies. So while I couldn't offer advice or consultation on the content of her interests, I was able to support her as she pursued various interests. If Aria had something she wanted to do, Daniel and I were all for encouraging her to excel in it. Daniel was, of course, thrilled to hear the news. Her study abroad was set for after the summer break of her junior year, and we continued to prepare steadily for it. Then the new year dawned, and it was time for her reunion party. As we admired our beautifully grown daughter and dined out, an unexpected call came in. I looked at my phone, seeing it was from my parents' home. And on closer inspection, I realized I hadn't noticed it earlier because I had turned down the ringer 20 times. No, 30? It was an onslaught of calls. What could it be, all of a sudden? I looked at Daniel and Aria. Both of them shrugged. In the 20 years since I started raising Aria, calls from my parents' home had been almost non-existent except for memorial services. Why don't you just go ahead and answer it? Right, I said and pressed the call button. Hello, this is Chloe.
Oh, Chloe, what have you been doing? I've called so many times and you never answer. You're as slow as ever.
As usual, her tone was harsh. Loud enough that even the two nearby could hear it. Sorry, I'm out right now.
Oh, you always have an excuse, always the same with you.
Sorry. By the way, what's the matter? I couldn't deal with my mother-in-law's attitude every time.
The TV. I saw it on TV. What's going on?
TV?
They just had it. The evening news. There was a special on the reunion party.
Reunion party special. Ah. That reminded me of the local station's evening program. Sorry, I've been out and haven't seen it. What happened?
What do you mean what happened? She was on TV, wasn't she?
Who? From the other side, a scolding voice came, "Don't play dumb." Meanwhile, Aria took out her smartphone and started fiddling with it.
It's about Aria. Chloe, why haven't you told us anything? She's received a scholarship from a car manufacturer to study in Germany, recommended by a professor from the tech university, hasn't she?
Oh. That's right, I remembered I hadn't told my family back home. From the other side of the smartphone screen, a loud voice echoed, "How could you not mention such an important thing?"
Mom, this thing?
Arya showed me a muted video. It appeared to be from our county's local station video channel.
All right, next, we'll visit this lab,
the broadcaster said as they entered a lab. And there, with a professor and an assistant, was Arya.
What? This happened today?
Yeah. Apparently, the content was about the promising youth from this year's reunion party day generation that the broadcasting station highlighted.
Why didn't you tell us about the study abroad thing?
I sighed. Mother-in-law, I thought you wouldn't be interested.
Even so, to be on TV. Oh. I could have bragged about it to the neighbors.
Arya looked at me curiously. Oh right. This wasn't a big deal to her, I realized.
Come to think of it, appearing on TV is a big deal for your generation, isn't it?
Daniel also muttered quietly. What? Arya's eyes widened in surprise. Indeed, it was true. I remember when a TV crew came into our neighborhood when I was a child, it caused quite a stir. And when it aired, my siblings and I would be glued to the screen. Nowadays, anyone can broadcast videos, so young people aren't as impressed by local TV interviews, and I don't feel it's as special as it used to be. But for my mother-in-law's generation, appearing on terrestrial TV is really a big deal, something to brag about to the neighbors. And I might add, my mother-in-law is quite a show-off. But that doesn't mean I have to report every detail to her.
But Mom, you've never really cared about Arya before. You didn't even ask where she was going to school since high school.
So why would I need to mention it now?
No, but still.
I could hear the panic in my mother-in-law's voice.
You wouldn't expect her to be at a tech university, would you? It's the highest-ranked science university in our state. Even Theodore couldn't get in.
Yes. The tech university Arya attends is the top science university in our state. And it's quite prestigious nationally too. Our county is a hub for the automotive industry, which ties into her current study abroad opportunity. Arya's self-devised plan, which she presented to her professor, somehow ended up in the hands of an engineer at King's Automotive, leading to a scholarship offer. Arya said it so casually, but even Daniel was astounded when he heard the whole story.
I never imagined a child with developmental disabilities could achieve this. Was I wrong?
I do have a disability ID. It's true she has developmental disabilities. Indeed, thanks to that ID, we've been able to get help for childcare when my own capacity was overwhelmed by her intense focus on tasks.
But how could a child with such a disability card get into such a good school?
What can I say? We just enhanced her strengths and supported her weaknesses.
What kind of strengths are we talking about?
I pondered. Explaining about her verbal comprehension and such wouldn't easily satisfy this woman. To cut it short, I continued.
Honestly, I don't really know the details of what Arya studies. You don't know?
My mother-in-law raised her voice even more.
You know I'm not very smart either, right? Well, that's true, but...
She was always brutally honest with me. She had always been straightforward with me, calling me slow or dumb.
Is it okay for a mother to be like that?
It's fine. Because she's working hard and doing what she wants. I'm not really doing anything special.
No, but...
I unapologetically hung up the phone. Wow, that was something, Arya said, looking at the disconnected phone with amazement. Half a year later, the day came for Arya to go to Germany with her professors. Daniel and I went to the international airport within our state to see her off.
Arya, are you really going to be okay? Maybe?
Arya responded in her usual laid-back manner.
It might not be okay, but we'll handle that when it happens,
said the professor, smiling. The assistant who was also going along chuckled at this. Since the wait at the airport was long, we spent the time chatting away at a cafe. But then it happened.
Arya, there you are.
I was startled by the voice.
Mom-in-law? What?
As soon as they spotted us, my mother-in-law and father hurried over, accompanied by several women of my mother-in-law's age.
Who are they, Mom? Grandpa and Grandma, and I don't know who else. Could it be the neighbors?
We whispered among ourselves in suspicion. However, I was surprised to see how dressed up my father and mother-in-law were.
Dad, Mom, what's going on?
I stood in front of Arya.
Come on, Chloe, don't be cold,
my father said. I tilted my head, and he continued, you know, I heard from your mom. After the party day, you barely contacted us. Oh, and Dad watched that local program too. It was recorded. Why didn't you come back to talk about it?
Really, she's always been so inconsiderate. Oh, these are some neighbors who really wanted to meet the genius granddaughter, so they came all the way here.
Genius? What is this about? I wondered, feeling incredulous. Just a while ago, they had barely made contact, dismissing her developmental disabilities as lacking any real ability. Honestly, since the party day, I've been inundated with annoying calls. I contacted my brother Theodore about this matter, asking him to limit his calls. Although Theodore had moved out and gotten married, he still held some influence over our parents. After all, he was their only son. It seems the home wasn't a comfortable place for Theodore either. As he had previously mentioned,
I liked both my sisters too, so I really hated how blatantly our mom favored one over the other. On top of that, she pushed Arya's care onto Chloe, right? That's when I completely lost respect for her.
When Theodore was 15, he was shown such behavior, and like me, he came to distrust our parents. The phone harassment from our stepmother was so bad that I had to rely on him to intervene.
How did you raise her like that? Everyone wants to know.
You never asked before, did you? I replied curtly.
Come on, isn't that a bit disrespectful?
My father admonished me.
Respect? Our stepmother didn't contact us for anything other than funeral events for 20 years, up until the Reunion party day, did she?
I responded nonchalantly. My father turned to my stepmother in surprise. That's not true, my stepmother said with a forced smile, and she began moving towards where the professors were seated.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I am Arya's grandmother. My granddaughter has been under your great care.
She began greeting them as she approached. The background buzzed with whispers of professor. Then the professor, with wide eyes, turned to my stepmother.
Wait, are you the person Arya mentioned? The one who didn't want to take care of your granddaughter because of her developmental disabilities and pushed her onto your daughter-in-law?
The professor asked bluntly, with a surprisingly cheerful expression.
What are you?
My stepmother was visibly stiffened.
Professor, she's not used to this kind of directness,
Arya said casually.
Oh, right. You told me about that. Yes, I certainly did. Facts are facts, after all. That's true, facts matter,
the assistant said, giving me a wry smile as if asking what to do next. Please continue as you were, I silently gestured. These two really are similar. Apparently, there are some types like this among university professors. They are sharp when it comes to their research, but often quite off in other areas. I've had dinner with the professor at our home concerning Arya's situation a few times, and honestly, it felt like there was another Arya there. When the two of them started talking, my husband and I could hardly keep up. The conversation was incredibly abbreviated and the leaps in topics were tremendous. The leaps in the conversation were astonishing. Often, they'd get so absorbed in their conversation that they wouldn't even notice everything had been cleared from the dining table until much later. This person also has initiative. He talked about Arya so much to an acquaintance working in a research lab. From her first year, how she dove into seminars and kept diving deeper into discussions, and detailed casual talks about what sort of things she proposed. That got passed up the chain in the lab, and they came forward with a scholarship, seeing her as a potential talent they wanted in the future.
It's quite unconventional, isn't it?
The assistant said with a wry smile, apparently tagging along to support such an unpredictable professor. Well, from an outsider's view, he must seem like a difficult person. I, too, think it would be troublesome if this professor lived nearby. After all, he's someone who can blurt out the situation with my mother-in-law so loudly.
No, that's not true at all. The granddaughter was given to Chloe, who couldn't have children of her own, at her request.
My mother-in-law desperately denied with a troubled look. The professor then said, well, I have a pretty good memory. When Arya first joined my seminar, she had already told me about it, and Arya herself has a good memory.
Yeah, my memory is the only good thing about me.
Right, Grandma?
You abandoned me when I was 1.5. You remember that? That time?
My mother-in-law looked at Arya, startled.
No, I don't remember it directly, but I remember all the photos of me at home. There are none from before I was 1.5. That means anything from before that, you didn't bring home, right? Because of the photos with my biological mother, right? I figured that out just from the timing.
What? My mother-in-law was taken aback. Ah, indeed, there are not enough words.
What I mean, mother-in-law, is that when you let me take this child, you didn't allow even a single photo of Mia to be taken. Did something like that happen? That's what this child is talking about. Whether Arya is in them or not, you kept all of Mia's photos to yourself, so we don't have a single photo of Arya from the cutest times, up to 1.5 years old.
At that, a murmur started among the neighbors in the background.
Yes, it was when she was about 7, right? Yes, I heard it from Uncle.
Arya, realizing she hadn't explained enough, suddenly sped up her explanation.
When I called Uncle, he said there are photos, but Grandma won't give them. When I asked why, Uncle told me. Grandma loved my deceased biological mother so much, she wanted to keep those photos. So any photos that include me are not allowed. That's why I don't have a single photo with my real mom.
The murmuring in the background grew louder.
Not a single photo with her real mom. Would you go that far? Now that you mention it, I remember. Chloe, you used to be left alone when everyone else went on trips.
The neighbors recalled.
So Theodore was saying that. He did a good job.
I found myself chuckling. Hearing this, my mother-in-law glared at me. What did you say?
Mother-in-law, don't you understand why Theodore moved out, even though his workplace isn't that far? What did you just say? Because he became embarrassed by his own mother, who used to call me slow or push up this child upon hearing she has developmental disabilities.
I spoke slowly and clearly, making sure the people behind could hear. And Arya, matching my tone with an even more animated one, continued.
Well, I don't really understand why you came, but Grandma, we really don't need any contact in the future. I don't care about you, and I don't plan to have any relationship going forward. Yeah, I probably won't even attend the funeral.
She said it so casually. I couldn't help but burst out laughing loudly. Then, almost as an afterthought, I added, come on, that's a bit too much, isn't it? I said so, but...
Sorry, just telling the truth.
The looks on my father and stepmother's faces were priceless at that moment. Afterwards, they would truly understand the big, scary ripples that escaped fish leave behind. Because, as it turned out, someone had recorded our exchange at the airport, and it had spread on social media. You should never underestimate evening local news shows. People of all ages in rural areas look forward to local shows. These aren't just about showing faces or making moments public. The programs are beloved because they pick up on news relevant to the local community. Local programs where Arya's face appeared clearly and her story was highlighted had probably caught the eye of peers who recognized her and took the video. Or perhaps, the sight of a confusing altercation at the airport might prompt someone to start filming anyway. The video, which clearly included audio, captured the phrase abandoned because of her developmental disability, which, in today's climate, resonated widely and quickly went viral. When Daniel and I were settling down after sending Arya off, he casually checked social media, spotted the trending word developmental disability, and found it was our video. The sheer number of reactions and comments. Daniel and I looked at each other and burst into laughter. Then the onslaught of calls from home started the next day. To avoid the hassle, I had set the phone to voicemail. Amid those messages, my stepmother was shrilly pleading.
Please, get that video taken down.
As if that was possible. According to Theodore, my stepmother has lately been unable to leave the house. This was because the local peers present at the scene had ensured that the viral video was linked correctly by their younger family members. The young people are spreading the word that the lady of that house pushed her developmentally disabled granddaughter onto her daughter-in-law. Attitudes towards developmental disabilities have changed considerably over the past 20 years. The behavior of my mother-in-law would certainly not be tolerated in today's society. As a result, her previous bravado is gone, and she now spends her days confined at home. My father often calls to complain about how hard it is to listen to my mother-in-law's grumblings. I maintain a strict voicemail policy. Because, frankly, my father never did anything when my mother-in-law was bullying me. I think he should take care of his wife by himself.
Hello, Mom. I've got my room settled. I visited the school.
Since her arrival, Arya has been calling every day. The campus is so big, and turns out you can manage with German once you're there. She tells me all sorts of random things. Honestly, her German was a crash course since the study abroad was decided, but it seems to be paying off. She's always had a good memory. And she has analytical skills and courage. It appears that she may be finding the overseas environment comfortable.
Hey Mom, I really will call every night.
Arya tells me, but I respond, yeah, well, when you have time is fine.
Don't say that, I get lonely.
But you get so caught up in your research.
Yeah, I probably will.
I replied, surely, you must be.
Just don't forget that I still miss my mom.
Of course. I assure her and then end the call across the sea. I reflect deeply for a moment. I'm glad I took her in. It'll just be Daniel and me for a while, but when she comes back, I'll make all her favorite dishes. After all, I am her mother. But, why are you okay? I was confused with John's pointless response. I thought he knew about Lisa's car accident. How could he behave like this? Even though I had contacted him, he didn't visit Lisa in the hospital and he arrived home in the morning smelling like booze. I was just confused. Well, I actually had an urgent task at work. But I had already checked with his workplace and confirmed that John hadn't been working. I let out a sigh as John still tried to lie and cover it up. Can't you even tell me the truth? I guess, of course, you can't, right? There was no way I didn't know what he'd been up to. I, armed with irrefutable proof, began my retaliation. Enough already. If you think I haven't noticed anything, you're making a big mistake. My name is Kathy Thompson. I turned 57 this year. After my first son, Brian, moved out when he got married, I was living with my husband, John. Even though I was just an ordinary housewife, an event occurred that shattered my peaceful life. The trigger was the car accident of Lisa, Brian's wife. One weekend, I received a call from Brian. Lisa's been in a car accident. When I heard the news, I felt the blood drain from my face. What should I do, Mom? Mom's car is in bad shape, too, and Lisa's still unconscious. Calm down, Brian. I'm heading to the hospital now. Can you tell me which room she's in? Brian had also just received a call from the hospital and seemed quite flustered. Despite his explanations were incoherent at first, Brian was finally got calm and I was able to get the details from him and headed to the hospital. I immediately called John while I was out. But John didn't pick up the phone no matter how many times I called, and I was puzzled. Why isn't he picking up? What on earth is he doing? I ran out of patience and decided to head to the hospital first. Upon arriving the room Brian had directed me, there were Lisa with her body covered in distressing casts, and crying Brian. I knew it, but John was not there. Mom, haven't you seen Dad? Well, he's not picking up his phone. I have no idea where he could be. Huh? That's odd, I called him before I called you, and he picked up then. What? I couldn't help but gasp at Brian's words. It seemed Brian had explained the situation to John, just as he had done with me, but John had yet to arrive. What is he thinking? Could it be work or something? I don't know. He just says he's going out for a bit. I had a rough idea of what he was up to, but I let out a sigh at John's attitude, unchanged even in this emergency. I was outraged at John, who didn't answer his phone or visit the hospital room despite hearing about the accident before I did. In the end, John never showed up from the time we listened to the doctor until we left. I swear, when he gets home, I'm gonna give him a piece of my mind. Yeah, thanks for coming, Mom. I would have been panicking all day if I was alone. It's all right, this is nothing. More importantly, you need to toughen up from here on out, got it? Yeah. I'll do my best. According to the doctor, Lisa is not in life-threatening danger and should be able to leave the hospital in a few weeks. But just as I started to feel relief, I was told that Lisa has damaged seriously to her lower body and she would have to live her life in a wheelchair from that time. In addition to his regular job, Brian would have to bear the large responsibility of caring for Lisa's daily needs. I couldn't find the words to encourage him, so I just patted his hunched back. If you need anything, just call me anytime. Thanks, Mom. I'll probably need your help with a lot of things, but I'll try my best too. After seeing off a completely dejected Brian, I left too for home. I was determined to do my best to help them as much as I could, but for that, I had to have a serious talk with John. That was what I was thinking, but when I got home, John wasn't there. I checked, but there were no returned calls, and despite waiting until late at night, John didn't come home at all that day. What on earth is he thinking, not even calling or anything? I thought maybe he got held up at work, so I called his office just in case, but of course, there was no such thing as John being called in on the weekend. For a moment, I thought, could John have had an accident too? But I quickly shook my head. I could guess his actions easily. I sighed in exasperation, quickly decided to cut my losses, cleaned up the dinner I had prepared, and went to bed. John didn't come home until the next day. It was nearly afternoon on a Sunday, when I heard some noise at the front door and a barely standing, yet seemingly in a good mood, John staggered into the living room. Welcome back. Seems like you had a great time. Huh? What? Kathy? Why are you here? Why shouldn't I be in my own house? John, who entered humming a tune and smelling of alcohol, completely changed his expression as soon as he saw my face. His eyes wide opened, he stared at me looking pale. Even when I asked him, "Where have you been all this time?" he just panicked and didn't answer. What? You've heard from Brian, right? Lisa is paralyzed from the waist down and will live in a wheelchair. Lisa? I cut off a visibly confused John and asked him what I wanted to know. What were you doing in such a difficult time? I asked, mixed with anger. Without listening to my words, John let out a carefree voice. I heard about the car accident. Then why did you come home at this hour without even contacting us? But, why are you okay? Huh? At John's incomprehensible response, I was confused. Is he still drunk and confused? Even John seemed to not understand, and our conversation was not aligning. What did you hear from Brian? That your car was in an accident and he went to the hospital. Yeah, that's right. So? What's so strange about me being fine? Weren't you the one driving the car? Finally, in John's own words, I understood and said, "Oh, I see now." It seems that John misunderstood the news of my car accident, which he heard from a phone call with Brian, as an accident involving the car I was driving. Indeed, at that time, Lisa was the one driving my car. But I hadn't used the car yesterday as I was out for some business. I had promised to lend the car to Lisa because she wanted to borrow it. Brian was so panicked, I assumed you had a serious accident, John said. You've received calls from me, haven't you? What about that? Didn't you check? I thought Brian had used your cell phone to call me. He seemed very panicked, so I assumed he was calling multiple times because of that. The more I listened to John's explanations, the more it didn't add up, causing me to furrow my brow. It seemed odd that he would ignore a panicked Brian, knowing that there had been a serious accident, and not answer the phone. He also didn't come to the hospital, despite misunderstanding that I was the one involved in the accident. On top of that, he acted irresponsibly by going out to drink and only coming home the next afternoon. As I struggled to understand what John was thinking, he watched my face and remained silent. So, when you thought that it was not Lisa but me, your wife, who had the accident, what were you doing and where were you? Well, I actually had an urgent task at work. I called your office too. Because you wouldn't answer your phone. There was no work for you, was there? Seeing John mumble and fumble with his words, trying to lie and cover up, I sighed. Can't you even tell the truth? But, I guess you can't, can you? What are you talking about? I can clearly tell where and what you were doing yesterday. What are you talking about? I was not at the office, but at a colleague's house. Enough. If you think I haven't noticed anything, that's a big mistake. I took my phone and showed John a picture attached in an email. It was a picture taken last night when he was out. The picture clearly showed where he was, what he was doing, and who he was with. Seeing it, John's face turned pale. Why do you have such a picture? It's a convenient world, isn't it? Even husbands' infidelity investigations are undertaken. That picture was part of the investigation report I received this morning from the detective I had hired. I couldn't thank the detective enough for getting in touch immediately, stating that they had finally caught John out. I've known for a long time that you've been unfaithful. No. I wasn't unfaithful. It's a misunderstanding. I knew you'd lie and claim your innocence. That's why I endured until I had clear evidence. For about half a year, I've been quietly preparing for a divorce without letting John find out. When I consulted a lawyer, they advised hiring a detective to gather solid evidence, which I did on the days I suspected John. I had wondered if it was worth it at this age, but this incident has shown me his true colors. It's said that a person's character is revealed in emergencies, and this must be it. I couldn't fathom spending even a single second more as a family with someone like him. Even though you've been very careful so far, you've made a big mistake this time. Why, after going to such lengths to cover your tracks? It just happened. I was drinking and got careless. You've been drinking with your mistress all this time, haven't you? Why, John? John, obviously uncomfortable, mumbled his words as if there was still something hard to express. I made it clear that if he continues to lie or try to deceive, it's him who'll be at a disadvantage. John then started to talk reluctantly. I thought, if you were in the hospital, I wouldn't need to sneak around anymore. And if it was an accident, there'd be insurance money and compensation from the other party. It felt like a sudden windfall, and I just ended up drinking too much. Windfall? I was rendered speechless by John's words. In other words, when he thought I had been in an accident, his first emotion was joy over the prospect of money coming in. It seems like he's been happily drinking with his mistress in anticipation of receiving insurance money and compensation. My mouth hung open in astonishment at John's utterly deplorable behavior, which far exceeded my imagination. This is what they mean by being too shocked for words. So, this was the first thing he thought of when he believed I'd been in a car accident. You're despicable, John. Listen, a man will always be a man. And yet you, older than me, you've given up on being a woman. So what? You think it's fine to have fun drinking with younger girls? You must be joking. I cannot continue to live with a man who thinks like this, let alone consider him family. He became defiant and started blaming me. Do whatever you want. But, I don't want to deal with such troubles, and I've been in touch with a lawyer about divorce. Serious? Did I do something to you? I would refuse to look after a man who, rather than coming to the hospital in an emergency, betrays his wife and indulges in fun and benefits. John kept making no sense, so I've given up persuading him. With no chance of taking back his words, John finally agreed to contact a lawyer. It may have been a heated argument, but finally, I felt freed from the hardship and patience I'd endured until now. Well, now that we're divorced, you need to leave this house. Fine, I'll do that. Keep in mind that I don't have any money to divide with you. What? I thought I was going to get some money thanks to you, so I spent a lot. How can I split what's not there? John said this, grinning unabashedly. I was amazed that he could be even more despicable when showing his true character. I've got clear evidence now, and above all, I've no more affection for John, who valued money over his spouse's safety. I wanted to hit him with the harsh reality. It's all your fault. You've made a mess of my life, John. What? You don't need to say that much. You've been unfaithful and I totally waste my time because of you. I've confessed everything and apologized, so it should be okay. What are you talking about? I haven't heard any proper apology from you yet. I was not sure if he's really believed that or is just confused, but either way, he should respect people more. As John looked at me with an annoyed face, I didn't feel like arguing with him. John tried to say something, but I cut off it saying, from now on, let's communicate through lawyers. Nevertheless, John started with some irritating excuses. I raised my voice. Enough. You can't just do as you please anymore. The conversation was going nowhere, so I decided to retreat to a hotel for the time being. While there, I took the opportunity to explain the situation to Brian over the phone, and told him about my plans for a divorce. Brian was left speechless by John's outrageous behavior. I was hesitant to involve Lisa, but Brian seemed to scorn his father even more than I did. Mom, come stay with us once things settle down. What? You're leaving the house, right? If you haven't decided where to go, you're more than welcome to stay with us. But what about Lisa? All the more reason. We'd feel stronger with you around. I'd have to discuss with Lisa as well, but I ended up deciding to impose upon Brian and his wife. Thinking about the future was rather depressing, but Brian's words gave me the courage to fight against John once again. Days later, when we involved a lawyer and got an explanation about the divorce process and the division of property, John couldn't say a word. His attitude was clearly different from when he was talking to me, but I wasn't surprised considering John's weakness for authority and titles. So, that concludes my explanation. Do you have anything else to discuss? No. Nothing. I sighed in relief, thinking I should have done this from the beginning, as everything finally came to an end. As John had said, our savings had been used up and there was hardly anything left to split. Therefore, I decided to take home items as a small supplement. However, upon seeing the moving company enter the house, whom I had arranged to coincide with my lawyer's departure, John tried to hinder me until the very end. Hey, you're taking that much? What's gonna happen to my life? Hey, you can't complain. We've discussed through the lawyer. We used those things as a family, I have rights too. You're the one who betrayed this family, don't you get it yet? As our possessions, large and small, were carried out, the house began to feel more spacious. Seeing this, John seemed to panic, worried about his future livelihood, and started to complain. He was particularly noisy when they were about to take away expensive items, like the microwave and refrigerator, that had just been replaced. I paid for those. I have the right to use them. Don't just take them away. I paid for half of them. Besides, you can't even cook, they would be wasted on you. John, who could barely prepare frozen food to be heated in the microwave, wouldn't use these things even if we left them. I've taken these items to use with Brian and Lisa would be more meaningful, so I took all the kitchen items. John was a pain, clinging on to the end. I knew he wouldn't easily agree to a divorce, as he was inherently incompetent at life. It was only when the last piece of luggage was carried out and I was about to leave the house that I finally heard an apology from John. Kathy, I'm sorry. I see. I intended to separate my home life with you from my love life with my mistress. I see. I wanted to leave as quickly as possible, repeating my lackluster responses, but John started saying things like, I really don't want a divorce, I don't want to split up. You must be kidding. No matter what you say now, we can't go back to how things were. Then at least, could you come over to cook? Pardon? She can't cook, so there's no way we can live together. I was flabbergasted by John's words until the very end. Why did I ever live with such a man? Feeling that way, I sighed again. Of course, I couldn't entertain such nonsense, so I left the house without saying a word. About a month after the divorce was finalized. While supporting Lisa's life, I was living a challenging yet enjoyable cohabiting life. My ex-husband, John, came to our house. Brian, surprised at the sight of him through the window, said he was going to the door while trying to hide behind me. While Lisa and I were quietly listening from the living room, we heard the following conversation. "Brian, how have you been? Getting along with Lisa? Thanks to you, life without you is very enjoyable." "Don't say that, your dad's had a hard time, too." I couldn't help but frown and exchanged glances with Lisa at John's audacious remarks. It seemed that his mistress cheated on him and ran away because he couldn't take care of himself without me. John, having lost all his reliable contacts, appeared to have visited us out of desperation. Friends and relatives who knew the reason for our divorce would naturally not assist him. He seemed to be struggling a lot, unable to survive by himself. But of course, Brian, who knew the situation well, wouldn't accept John. Relentless, John kept saying absurd things like, "I now understand the feelings of those who have been cheated on. And I apologize, I want us to get back together. You have Lisa and Kathy, don't you? I'm all alone. I want to live together as a family again. Stop joking around. It's your own fault for betraying the family and losing trust." "Excuse me, can I say something?" It seemed that Lisa, who had been listening with me, couldn't stand it anymore and went to the entrance in her wheelchair. John, looking somehow pleased, was abruptly told by Lisa, "I understand your situation. Actually, my mom also got into a traffic accident and she needs care." "What?" "My legs are like this and it's too much for Brian to support two people. So, we don't have the capacity to take care of you." "Is that so?" Lisa seemed to have deliberately lied to drive John away. Assuming John, who disliked dealing with trouble, it should work effectively, and I couldn't help but grin at her quick thinking. However, John responded in a way that was beyond our imagination. While barely managing his own life, John's eyes lit up. "Really?" he said, grinning slyly and letting these words slip out of his mouth. "Well, anyway, let's put Kathy in a nursing home with insurance money or something. Then we could live together." He raised his voice as if to say it was a really good idea. Brian and the others froze, unable to say anything. I covered my face with both hands. "You clearly haven't learned anything, you fool." "What, Kathy? You're here, aren't you? Duped us again, didn't you?" "What do you mean duped?" "Shut up and listen, all you do is make shameless remarks. Stay out of our lives from now on." I yelled at him with a red face and drove John away. Whether he was surprised by my fierce look, even John quickly withdrew with a grimace on his face. I looked back at Brian and the others, gasping for breath. We forced a bitter smile at each other, as if after a storm had passed. "I hope he won't come again." Was he always like that? I feel like we suddenly can't communicate anymore. I don't want to deal with him ever again. Some time passed again. Without any more onslaughts from John, we heard rumors that he had to go and live quite far for work. Having regained a peaceful life, I've continued to live modestly and joyfully with Brian and his wife. We've renovated the house to be more wheelchair-friendly. Lisa's rehab went well, and although it was slow, she recovered enough to walk without a wheelchair. It was a recovery so miraculous, even the doctors were surprised. "Once I can walk more, I'll take care of you, Kathy." "Thanks, but you're getting ahead of yourself." "I'm still going strong." Lisa's scars, which were said to possibly remain after the accident, are now completely healed. Once she's recovered more, we've set a goal of going on a trip as a group of 3. We plan to go to a famous national park that Lisa has been wanting to visit, probably something like Yellowstone. With a goal in mind, Lisa's motivation has skyrocketed. While supporting her dedicatedly with Brian, we are leading a lively life. This is a very ordinary and healthy family, and it is also my happiness. Step up and be a proper daughter-in-law. Care for your husband and in-laws, not for your parents. Really? As a daughter-in-law, do I really have to sever all connections with the parents who raised me? That doesn't make sense. I'm going to shake up that outdated mindset. My name is Julie. I'm a 56-year-old woman, recently horrified by the sight of deep laugh lines appearing. Maybe it's because I've been slacking off with my facial expressions under the mask for almost 1 year. I remember venting my stress by making exaggerated faces under my mask when an annoying colleague made snide remarks. Maybe that was the cause. I need to make sure not to forget to put on my mask and accidentally show my irate face to my colleagues. Back in my 20s, when I didn't have any laugh lines or wrinkles on my forehead, I married my husband Frank, who is 3 years older than me, and gave birth to our daughter, Abby. With the pregnancy and birth, my environment changed drastically. Frank, who was a kind man, started to spout possessive lover-like phrases like, "Who's more important to you, me or our child?" He seemed to dislike when I comforted our daughter when she cried during his mealtime, or when I devoted all my time at night to Abby. If he feels that way, I wish he would help more with childcare, but he shows no signs of doing so. Instead, Frank suggested, or rather decided, that we should live with his mother, saying, "If mom helps with childcare, it'll lighten your load." His mother was somewhat troublesome since the pregnancy. She had always been overbearing with Frank. Frank was often summoned to his parents' house after work, and she frequently contacted him, even without any significant matter to discuss. But she did it only for Frank. She didn't interfere with me in particular. But, suddenly after the pregnancy announcement, she began to interfere with me as well, saying things like, "Come over at least 2 or 3 times a week. I'm worried about you, Julie." There's no way I was going to travel the distance to her home that required a train ride that frequently while pregnant. I had been avoiding her invitations by any means possible, but then another adversary appeared. "Why won't you visit when mom's worried about you? Why don't you understand that she's worried about you?" Frank started blaming me. When I responded, "Then, when you have the flu, you'll visit my parents' house, right? If I say my parents are worried, you'll go, right?" Frank became silent, and somehow I was able to avoid visiting during my pregnancy. But the real hardship began after giving birth. Frank's mother would constantly contact me with various demands, such as wanting to be the one to give Abby her first bath or wanting to supervise when I breastfeed Abby. Even from a distance, it was tough dealing with her, but now she wanted us to live together. The idea of living with Frank's mother, who often has quite unreasonable demands, brings nothing but despair. However, the day after I firmly stated, absolutely no, Frank's mother and father arrived at our house with their suitcases. The start of hell. Living together has increased the hardship. Frank's mother often tries to give Abby sweets and juice that she hasn't eaten before. I'm always cautious about allergies, giving my child new foods little by little, it's a cardinal rule. However, there were times when she tried to let my baby daughter taste honey, even though she's still too young for it. Despite asking my mother-in-law to stop, she'd burst into tears, accusing me of disliking her. I felt like I was on the brink of a nervous breakdown. My father-in-law also critiqued my parenting, saying, "Julie, your way of raising Abby is pitiful. She'll end up becoming a criminal." He utterly disregarded my childcare methods. What I'm saying is bad is all generally known stuff that's written as bad in parenting guidebooks. By his logic, America would be a crime-ridden country. Yet, he isn't the type to back down just because it's written in the guidebook. If I say such things, he would only yell at me, "Don't argue back. You lack awareness as a wife of my son. You've already married into this family, you should listen to what your parents-in-law say." I do retaliate from time to time, but it's impossible to win when our conversations hardly make sense. All I get is a flat denial of my entire personhood. I felt like I was going mad. Then one day, an incident occurred. My mother-in-law said, "I bought a pacifier," and tried to force my daughter to take it. The moment she shoved the pacifier at my daughter, making her cry, my father-in-law declared, "Here, let me show you how it's done. You don't know how to use it, do you?" and casually put the pacifier in his own mouth, attempting to give it back to my daughter afterwards. Yikes. I stopped him in a hurry, saying, "Please stop. There's also the risk of cavities." The concern about cavities was genuine, but I was simply disgusted. However, my father-in-law seemed not to understand why I was upset, and started to snap back at me, saying, "Again. Then what can I do with my grandchild? When things get to this point, it's out of control." My mother-in-law started to cry, saying, "I wanted my eldest son's wife to have a boy who will be an heir, but I'm tolerating it because she's my granddaughter and I want to love her. As for father-in-law, he started yelling, I wanted to build a duplex right after you got married, but I decided to live here with you guys because I thought it would be tough for you. They are completely unaware of how absurd their statements are. They are craziest parents-in-law. I envy the other mothers-in-law who have daughters-in-law who aren't mean to their mothers-in-law. You're all right. Julie should be more conscious of appreciating us. Here we go again. I'm so fed up. My husband, the root of all this chaos, hardly comes home as he finds his parents troublesome, and spends every night out drinking with his colleagues and friends. I don't have the luxury of voicing my complaints or the energy to run away from home. I'm just struggling with raising my daughter and dealing with my eccentric parents-in-law. However, due to this incident, my mother-in-law began to spread all kinds of rumors about me in the neighborhood and among relatives. I was truly shocked when I received a message from my sister-in-law one day, asking Mom said you did something to Abby and she has a bruise on her bottom, is that true? Yes, her bottom is blue right now, but it's just Mongolian spots. There's nothing else. However, this is not the first time this has happened. My mother-in-law has a tendency to inflate stories from bits and pieces she's noticed, painting me as the bad wife in the neighborhood. I've been told by neighbors, I know there's a lot going on, but you shouldn't pinch your mother-in-law, and other lies. Of course, I haven't done such a thing. The rumors about me seem to have reached my husband, who's been mostly absent. One day, he suddenly blew up at me. What's going on here? Huh? What are you on about all of a sudden? Apparently, you were mad when Mom held Abby. If she's going to throw a toddler who's just started walking towards the ceiling while playing up, up and away, of course, I got upset. You just had to catch her. Are you serious right now? So, you have a problem? A big one. What's with this attitude? You don't take care of Abby. You push all matters related to your mother and father onto me. You don't do the housework too. Who do you think is managing this house? It's me. I always say that they'll take care of Abby and you should rest. I told you, I can't rest because I can't leave her with them with confidence. Enough. I don't want to know. With that, Frank, my husband, slammed the door and left the room. I was left behind, with a big problem on my hands. Later that night. What? An accident. Okay, got it. I'll be there right away. I received a sudden call from my mother. She told me that my parents had a car accident. They were safe, but they had to undergo some tests because of their age. The word accident sent a chill down my spine. I was shocked. Seeing my distress, Frank asked, "What's wrong?" Mom and Dad had a car accident. They are going through tests, and I am worried. Can I take Abby and go to the hospital? What? Frank and his parents looked at me as if I were saying something absurd. If they're not dead, you don't need to go. What? I couldn't believe what my mother-in-law said. Instead of that, look. Dinner is not ready yet. Hurry up and do the housework. You have a husband and family to care for. You lack awareness. Stop relying on others. For some reason, there was applause from Frank and his dad. Hurry up and prepare the dinner. If you have a problem with what Mom says, we'll get a divorce. Frank had a smug grin on his face as if he was trying to assert his dominance. Divorce? Is that their ace in the hole? How naive can they be? But I probably don't need to argue anymore. They themselves are suggesting a divorce. All right, I understand. Here you go. I pulled out a paper from a drawer and handed it to Frank. His eyes widened as he looked at me and the paper alternately. What's this? Just as you wished, I am divorcing you. I've had enough of living in this mess. I've been in contact with a lawyer and got this application for divorce. Frank's parents, who were trying to peek at the paper, what they gasped. Julie Smith. Divorce is not something you do so easily. She called me by my full name in front of the certificate. I knew you were a hard-hearted woman, but if you're this stubborn, no one will love you. My father-in-law also started his irrelevant sermon. It was your son who mentioned divorce so casually. I'm absolutely going to the hospital to see my parents, I said. Then leave Abby here. She's our granddaughter, shouted my mother-in-law. No, I gave birth to her, I won't. Leaving her with you all would shorten her life. If I knew you were going to be such a horrible daughter-in-law, I would never have let my son marry you. You'll taint Abby too, being a mother like you. Ah, here we go again. Even when I saw my mother-in-law start to cry, all I could think was, how impressive it is that she can retain so much water to cry. You're the one who said it. I'll leave it up to the lawyer. As I pressed my husband, he turned pale for a moment, but he agreed with turning the application in. You thought I was going to hold you back, huh? Too bad. If you apologize now, I might forgive you. Come on, if you're going to apologize, do it now. Submit it if you have enough brave to do that. Why? Why should I apologize? There's no way I'm coming back. I snatched the divorce application from my husband, simply said, goodbye, and left the house. I can buy everything else again. I should hurry to the hospital and cut ties with this household. That's what I thought. I quickly dropped it into the postbox and hurried to my parents. The test results showed that my parents were fine. I felt relieved. While talking to my mom, I heard a voice from the back. You came, Julie? Catherine, are you okay? I'm sorry, it's because of my father's driving. No, it's okay. They really saved me when they found me feeling faint on the road. I'm fine, no injuries or anything. Catherine, my sister-in-law smiled as she spoke. Actually, Catherine was also in the car when my parents had the accident. Catherine's house and my parents' house are very close, and they have been friendly neighbors since before I married Frank. This time, on their way to the grocery store, my parents found Catherine fainting from anemia on the road, and the accident happened on the way to the hospital. By the way, neither my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, nor Frank knows that Catherine and my parents are neighbors. Catherine has been hiding her address from her mother since she got married. As the eldest daughter, Catherine had been subjected to more interference from her mother than Frank had. Frustrated, Catherine told her, I'm married now, and I'm moving out. Please don't interfere anymore. And I won't tell you my address. But apparently, her mother said, well, I'll come along for a private view then. It's quite a scary story. Eventually, they compromised that Catherine would participate in family events but wouldn't reveal her address. Even now, her mother is still dissatisfied with this. Given this background, Catherine has been very worried about me, and since my mother-in-law started insisting that my daughter's birthmark was a curse, she's been pushing me, saying, why don't you get a divorce? I know it might be scary, but you, Julie, can manage it. I'll support you. Even for Catherine, it was unexpected that Frank would turn out to be more like his mother. So she kept telling me, Frank seems to take after his mother, and with their support, he's going to continue flaunting his power as the eldest son and husband. It'd be better for you to leave. Thanks to her words, I was able to calm down and realize that although becoming a single mother would be scary, it would be better for my daughter, and that's how I ended up visiting the lawyer. But, Julie, are you sure you're okay coming here at this hour? Your in-laws didn't say anything? Well, actually. While I was laughing nervously and trying to play it off, I casually told Catherine and my mom the whole story. After hearing everything, Catherine let out a big sigh, clearly frustrated, and my mom looked pale, saying, so, you've been through all that. Well, needless to say, I felt a bit relieved, knowing that I wasn't the one who was out of line, but it was them. Just then, my cell phone rang. I hastily pulled out my phone, panicked that I had forgotten to switch it off in the hospital, only to see my mother-in-law's name displayed on the incoming call. Seeing that, Catherine, my sister-in-law, let out a small gasp before I could react. Catherine's trauma towards her parents seemed deep-rooted. As I ignored the call, text messages began to pour in one after another. I want to bathe Abby. Please come home. We seem to be out of milk. Could you pick some up? It's a shame that you don't appreciate all I've done for you, Julie. It breaks my heart to think I won't see my grandchild anymore. Let's make amends. I forgive you. Please buy the family bucket from KFC that you love so much. The moment we read the messages, everyone in the room was frozen. I wonder what kind of thought process led her to say such things at this point. Or perhaps she doesn't think we're actually getting divorced? Deciding to give her a piece of my mind to stop her from contacting us forever, Catherine and I decided to go confront my in-laws. When we arrived, it was my mother-in-law who first opened the door. Catherine, why are you here? Oh, are you here to celebrate Julie's reconciliation with us? Upon seeing Catherine, my mother-in-law quickly became giddy with excitement, anticipating a party. No way. What do you think you're doing to Julie? That's disrespectful. I'm just trying to teach Julie how to be a good wife to my son. It's simply an unsought advice. You are the meddlesome old woman. At Catherine's pinpoint counter, my mother-in-law fell silent. Well, it doesn't matter. Let's have a party. Come in, come in. I can't enter. I also have in-laws, and according to you, my parents are strangers. Didn't you tell Julie the same? So, I should follow that, shouldn't I? Upon hearing Catherine's words, my mother-in-law turned pale. Catherine also has in-laws. So, if we follow my mother-in-law's absurd theory, Catherine can't join the party as her parents are strangers to her. She is a wife, so Catherine should return home immediately and do the housework. Yes, indeed. It's a waste of time to talk with my mom when I'm busy with housework. At our exchange, my mother-in-law shouted in a loud voice, "Why are you saying such terrible things? I'm done. I'm ending my life right here. Even during my school days, you kept causing a scene at the school gate, saying, 'Don't leave me alone.' I'll end my life here. But look, you're still alive. Stop trying to threaten me with such things, especially when you do nothing." No. As Catherine responded, my mother-in-law became serious and tried to retort, but she was lost for words. Hit the nail on the head, didn't she? But her commotion brought out my father-in-law and Frank from the back. "What are you two doing tormenting your mother?" my father-in-law yelled. Frank, thinking I came back for a reconciliation, looked self-satisfied and smirked, "You came back pretty fast." Gross. Hey. Because of Julie, even Catherine has turned into a bad woman. She's saying she can't even eat a meal with me. Upon hearing that, my father-in-law widened his eyes, glared at us, and said, "Who the hell do you think you are, acting like this when someone is generous enough to forgive you and not insist on a divorce? Actually, when you stopped us from going to the hospital and it led to a divorce, Catherine was in the car with my parents." Wait, what? It's true that I was worried about my own family, but as a sister-in-law, I was also concerned about Catherine, who was in the car with my parents. So, your thinking was to prioritize household chores over Catherine's accident, right? I asked, flashing a smile. The color drained from the faces of my mother and father-in-law. But... We didn't know that Catherine was in the car. You started lecturing me about household chores before I even had a chance to tell you. That was a lie. I had decided not to mention Catherine because they thought they would be asked, "Why was Catherine with your parents?" I also hoped that by leaving all houseworks for a night, Frank and his parents would initiate the divorce. I was worried that if I broached the subject, the conversation wouldn't progress. They, who were considering a divorce, still sent me emails like, "Buy some milk." That's unfair. You can't change the rules halfway through. I'm not sure what's unfair, but everything you said at that time was true, wasn't it? What did I say at that time? My mother-in-law looked bewildered. You told me to think of your own family as strangers when I have in-laws. Here's a comment from Catherine. What? My sister-in-law flashed a smile at my bewildered mother and father-in-law. As I said earlier, I'm also a wife of a man now, so I'm going to cut off all ties with this house. I consider my own family strangers. No, no way. My mother and father-in-law were lost for words. My husband was also astonished. Coincidentally, I've already decided to move out of this town. I won't be attending family events anymore. This is it. Wait, Catherine. If that's the case, I want to visit your state sometimes. There's no way I'm going to invite you over in this situation. Are you out of your mind? My sister-in-law, who had been unable to assert herself due to her ties to her parents, seemed to have made a decision following my divorce. Well, that's fine, Mom. We still have Julie and Abby. Don't be freaking out too much. That's right. Forget about the ungrateful Catherine. Right, Julie, Abby. My husband and father-in-law said, turning to me with a smile. Are these people stupid? They are a ridiculously dense family. I've already filed for divorce. Unlike Catherine, neither of you is related to me anymore. It's beyond the issue of cutting ties. I've become a complete stranger. What? Don't lie. You can't submit the paper at night. My father-in-law yelled. Well, I just dropped into the post box. It will take some time to be received, but I have no intention of retracting my application, so it's a divorce. Julie, weren't you in love with me? My husband also raised his voice. A husband who says heavy stuff like, who do you care about more, me or our child? I've lost my feelings for you long ago. The only thing that made me hesitate about the divorce was whether it was right to take a father away from Abby. Then, for Abby's sake, we should try again. Try again? That's a word you use when there's even a tiny chance of reconciliation. How are we going to try again when my feelings for you are completely crushed? Right now, all I can think is that you're saying something disgusting. Whether he heard my final words or not, my husband bit his lip with tear-filled, red eyes. You are such a mama's boy. I started to say, but kept it a secret. After that, the divorce was finalized without a hitch, and I changed all my phone numbers and email addresses. However, it seems they asked a mutual acquaintance for our contact information, and once again, I started receiving messages from my ex-husband and his mother. What a dysfunctional family, truly. From his mother, I received a message saying, "Isn't it about time for Abby to see her grandma?" From my ex-husband, I received something along the lines of, "I'm always here for you," which was as creepy as it sounds. Needless to say, I promptly blocked them. But it didn't end there. Around the time Abby started elementary school, it seems they hired a private investigator. There was a time when my ex-husband and his parents ambushed us in front of our house. "If you're still single, I'll give it another shot," my ex-husband had the audacity to say. His parents told me, "We've always considered you a part of our family, even after the divorce," which was quite frightening. I immediately threatened to get the police involved. They finally seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, and I haven't heard from them since. I still have a relationship with Catherine, but she's been stalked by a private investigator too. Shockingly, her mother once tried to pick up Catherine's child from daycare pretending not to know anything. This also ended up involving the police, and bad rumors spread in the neighborhood. The entire family moved somewhere else. Thanks to this, peace returned to Abby and me. That family with their heads in the clouds, only thinking about themselves. I hope they live out their lives quietly without causing trouble for others. It's been nearly 30 years since that commotion. Now, Abby is married to her childhood friend, and they recently had a baby. I was worried that Julie might follow in my footsteps. But since they were young, their parents have been very kind to her, and they've established a good relationship. More importantly, despite the prejudice against single-parent families back then, they never held any bias and let their children play together, which speaks volumes about the quality of their family. I don't think I have to worry. I've been taking turns with their family in taking care of my grandchild, and I'm completely smitten with the adorable and honest little girl. She even wears the clothes I make for her, and I adore her so much it feels like my heart could burst. Maybe even wear a miniskirt and show off a bit. Just kidding, I wouldn't really do that. But this year, I do plan to put a bit more effort into dressing up. I've been so caught up in life that I haven't taken care of myself. Here's to enjoying life with a youthful spirit.